Reading poetry is awesome.
Writing poetry is awesomer. Stick around to find out more about how to read poetry
And how to take your poetry writing from meh to magnificent.
If you study Caribbean poetry, it is highly probable you'll encounter the work of Mark McWatt. A Guyanese writer, his poem, Old Haiku, is a beloved staple in classrooms. This poem is a lament by, of all people, a folklore character. The Old Haiku in the title is a Guyanese shape-shifting demon that sucks the blood of babies and ladies. The narrator, the Old Haiku herself, admits she sucks these innocents to stay young. If only babies didn't smell so nice, and if I could only stop hearing the soft, soft call of that pure blood running in new veins, singing the sweet song of life, tempting an old dry-up woman who'd been holding her final note for years, afraid of the dying hum. Yes! Serving longing, addiction, sexism, and society's impossible beauty standards for women all at once. Get it, crone? The crone is an archetype, a big word that means a pattern that comes back over and over in literature. In this poem, McWatt taps into a seemingly universal suspicion of unmarried elderly women who live alone. In other Caribbean countries, a similar character is called Old Hag, Sukuya, or just plain Hag. When you read a poem, do you think of the poet like the actual human who wrote these words? And do you ever think that knowing more about the poet could help you understand and appreciate the poetry better?
No, the poet is separate from the poem.
Fight me, T.S. Eliot. You could look at a poem as a piece of art, floating outside space and time. The poem just is a self-contained thing that exists. Or you could look at a poem as a unique piece of art, created by a poet who came from a certain culture and lived in a certain time. The poet then is a product of the poet's life. Let's talk about 3 poems by poets from hugely different cultures and times. John Donne was a 17th century English clergyman. Sylvia Plath was an American woman writing in the 1950s, just before the start of the second wave of feminism. Bashu was from 17th century Japan, a very traditional formal society. Bashu wrote a traditional formal style of poem called haiku.
The cry of the cicada gives us no sign that presently it will die.
What's the T on structure? The way a poem looks on the page affects more than just, well, the way it looks. Choice of structure means a lot. Haiku is a traditional Japanese form of poem that is strictly metered. Stresses in the words have to follow a pattern. The first line contains 7 syllables, the second 5, and the last 7. And a haiku is usually a poem about nature. By the choice of structure, the haiku writer automatically chooses the poem's theme and length. His choice of word and imagery is what makes his haiku unique. That's the challenge of structure. How does the poet use a cookie-cutter shape to create a unique piece? The sonnet is an classic European form of 14-line poetry in iambic pentameter, with a distinct line structure and rhyme scheme. There are different kinds of sonnets with different rhyme schemes. Usually, the first part of the poem makes an argument or observation, and the last part of the poem has a twist that flips the reader's expectations about the opening argument or observation. Free verse is the rebel of the poetry world. Free verse rejects classical form and structure. Lines can be of any length, and you can have any number of lines you want. The poem can use any kind of rhythm or none at all. Nothing has to rhyme. A lot of modern poetry is free verse.
No verse is free for the man who wants to do a good job.
Yes. Thanks for that. And now, back to our regular programming. Let's look at poems by Dunn, Sylvia Plath, and Bashu. Each one is from a different time and place, but they're all about the same thing: death.
Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me.
Remember that Dunn was a priest? Super Christian, super. Dunn chose the sonnet form because of its similarity to a meditation technique from, the church.
I am important to her. She comes and goes. Each morning it is her face that replaces the darkness. In me, she has drowned a young girl, and in me, an old woman rises toward her day after day like a terrible fish.
Sylvia Plath was an American woman writing just before feminism exploded into a worldwide movement for women's equal rights. One of the ways women still aren't equal with men is that they're judged on their looks. When those looks get wrinkly, it is the end. In Mirror, Plath talks about the theme of death and mortality from the perspective of the mirror itself. The mirror that watches this so-called death happen day by day. Notice that it's the mirror speaking, not the woman. The woman is literally seen and not heard, like what was expected of women of that era. FYI, terrible fish became a thing women said when they talked about aging. That's how important this poem was. Way before anime, Japan in the 1600s wasn't all samurai and Bushido, baby. They took their haiku very, very seriously. Bashu was a poet since his teens, with a famous mentor. After he became famous himself, Bashu lost his zhush and became a recluse. Then his hut burnt down and his mother died. Bummy. He became a wandering poet in the countryside. It's during this period that he wrote this poem, possibly inspired by his long walks in the bush. The poem is about the fleetingness of life. As a haiku, the poem has that pattern of 7-5-7 syllables, and it's about nature. He uses the cicada, a bug, as a symbol of life and death. Cicadas hibernate for many years underground, then emerge from the earth, make a lot of noise, and die relatively quickly. But that's life, right? Or is it death? Writing a poem with a structure is a great challenge. There are so many forms out there, from the Middle Eastern ghazal to the European sonnets and the Malay pantu. Today's challenge: pick a structure and write a poem on a topic of your choosing. Try it.